My name is Hector Manuel Rojas Contreras. I am 50 years old and have spent 32 years working as a mason in Guadalajara, Jalisco. My hands bear the scars of cement work, my knees crack every time I stand up after kneeling to lay tiles, and my back seems to carry the weight of every wall I have ever built. Yet, none of those physical burdens compares to the weight I have carried in my heart over the last few years. I have built homes for families and buildings where people live out their dreams, structures that will stand long after I am gone, and yet, in my own home, I haven't been able to build even a bridge of understanding with those I love most. Everything began to change when I truly met Jesus. I don't mean knowing him by name, as I had since childhood when my grandmother took me to Sunday Mass. I mean that real, profound, transformative encounter that shakes every fiber of your being and shows you that everything you thought was important was merely vanishing smoke. It happened during an evangelistic campaign that came to my neighborhood. I was walking by after an exhausting shift. My clothes were stained with mortar and brick dust, my boots caked in mud, when I heard a voice speaking in a different way. It wasn't the boring religious rhetoric I had heard all my life. It was someone speaking of total surrender, of absolute devotion, of a Christ who didn't come to make us comfortable, but to transform us from the very root. That night, standing in the crowd with the smell of dried sweat clinging to my work shirt, I felt those words pierce through all my defenses. I wept as I hadn't since I was a child. I wept because I realized I had been living an empty life, chasing after things that didn't matter, building walls on the outside while my inner self was crumbling. When I returned home that night, I told my wife, Gloria Elena, about what I had experienced. She looked at me with a mixture of confusion and concern. She told me it was fine, that drawing closer to God was a good thing, but warned me not to let myself go overboard with it all. I didn't realize then that this would be the first of many warnings. At first, everything seemed manageable. I began attending a small evangelical church in the neighborhood. I would arrive early on Sundays, help set up the chairs, and stay after the service to pray with fellow believers. I started reading the Bible every night before bed, and the words I found there filled me with a peace I had never known before, but that inner peace was accompanied by an external conflict I never could have imagined. My eldest son, Carlos Eduardo, was the first to openly mock me. One afternoon, I came home from work to find him in the living room with his friends. One of them made a joke about Christians, and they all laughed. When I tried to talk to them about respect and what it truly meant to follow Christ, Carlos Eduardo looked at me, with those same eyes that had once gazed at me with such admiration during his childhood, but now reflected only contempt. In front of all his friends, he told me that I was turning into a fanatic, that I was losing my mind, that soon I'd be standing on a street corner with a sign saying the end of the world was near. His friends laughed even louder. I stood there with my Bible under my arm, feeling the air grow heavy, while the silence following the laughter rang in my ears like thunder. I couldn't eat dinner that night. I shut myself in my room and wept into my pillow so no one would hear me. I asked God why following him had to hurt so much. Why did my own flesh and blood reject me for wanting to live in obedience? Why was the price of truth the mockery of those I had brought into the world? But something inside me, something stronger than the pain, told me I couldn't turn back. My youngest daughter, sweet Maria, tried to stay neutral. She didn't mock me directly, but she didn't defend me either. When her brother made hurtful comments about my faith during meals, she would lower her gaze and keep eating in silence. That silence hurt just as much as Carlos Eduardo's words, because in that silence, I could read her shame at having a father who had changed, who was no longer the man who drank beer with the neighbors on weekends, who no longer told off-color jokes, who no longer stayed up until the early hours watching soccer. I had given up those things not because they were mortal sins, but because they no longer filled the void that only Christ could fill now. But to them, that had turned me into someone strange, someone awkward, someone who had betrayed the version of a father they knew. Things were no different at work. I had been working with the same crew for over 15 years. We were like brothers. We had sweated together under the relentless summer sun. We had shared cake and sodas during our breaks, we had supported each other through difficult times, but when I started turning down invitations to go drinking after work, when I stopped joining in the crude conversations about women, and when I took out my Bible during lunch to read for a while before going back to mixing cement, everything changed. At first, it was the looks, then came the hushed comments, things I wasn't supposed to hear but heard perfectly well. Later came the outright mockery. They called me Father Hector, Mr. Holy Roller, and the Enlightened One. One of my co-workers, a man named Raul Fernando, with whom I'd worked on countless projects, started mimicking a preacher every time I opened my mouth. The others would laugh. I tried to smile and show that it didn't bother me, but inside, I felt as though every laugh were a stone striking my chest. What hurt the most wasn't the mockery itself, but the loneliness. That profound loneliness of being surrounded by people yet feeling completely isolated, of knowing you no longer belonged to the group, that you had become the outsider, the one who didn't fit in, the one who had chosen something they could neither understand nor respect. There was one particularly hard day. We were building a 2-story house in a new residential area. The heat was unbearable, one of those days when the sun seemed inches from your head and the hot air burned as you breathed. During the midday break, while the others sat in the shade eating and telling stories, I stepped aside to pray. I simply closed my eyes and began to speak quietly with God, thanking Him for the work and the strength to carry on, and asking Him to help me be a light in such a dark environment. When I opened my eyes, everyone was staring at me. Raul Fernando stood up and began to clap slowly, sarcastically. He said, loudly enough for everyone to hear, suggesting that if I was talking to God, I should ask Him when wages were going to go up. Everyone laughed. Another co-worker added that I might as well ask if He could perform a miracle and finish the construction job all by Himself. That way, they could go rest. More laughter. I stood there, my hands still clasped, feeling shame and anger churning in my stomach. I wanted to defend myself. I wanted to shout that they didn't understand anything, that they were mocking something sacred. But the words wouldn't come out. I simply lowered my gaze, picked up my hard hat, and went back to work. That afternoon, while hauling sacks of cement under the scorching sun, I wept. My tears mingled with my sweat, so no one noticed them. Amidst stifled sobs, I asked God why it all had to be so hard. Why did following Him mean losing everyone's respect? Why was the cross so heavy? Yet, even in the midst of the pain, something inside me refused to let go, something greater than my need for acceptance, stronger than my desire to belong. It was the certainty that I had found the truth, and that no amount of mockery could change that. Things got worse at home. My wife, Gloria Elena, began to grow weary of my new life. She complained that I wasn't the same anymore, that I had become distant and preferred being at church to being with my family. I tried to explain that wasn't the case, that my love for them hadn't diminished, but that I had found a greater purpose. She didn't want to listen. To her, I had chosen God over them, and that felt like a betrayal. Family meals turned into silent battlegrounds. I would pray before eating, while they would start their meal without waiting for me. Whenever I tried to share something I had learned at church or in my Bible reading, they would change the subject or simply get up from the table. On Sunday mornings, as I got ready for the service, I could feel the tension in the air. Gloria Elena made unnecessary noise in the kitchen. Carlos Eduardo played loud music in his room. Dulce Maria stayed in her pajamas, looking sleepy. To show me she had no intention of joining me, I would leave the house alone, walking the streets of my neighborhood, feeling the weight of loneliness with every step. I saw other whole families heading to mass together, parents with their children, husbands with their wives, and I wondered why I couldn't have that, why my obedience to God had resulted in this painful isolation. There were Sundays when I thought about giving up, about going back to who I used to be, the one who caused no trouble, the one who fit in, the one who made everyone laugh. But then I would remember the words of Jesus that I had read over and over again. Whoever loves father or mother more than me is not worthy of me. Whoever loves son or daughter more than me is not worthy of me. And I understood that this was the price, this was the real cost of following Christ. It wasn't a financial cost, not a monthly fee, it was the cost of being misunderstood, rejected, and isolated by those I loved most. The nights were the worst. I would lie down next to Gloria Elena, but there was an invisible chasm between us. She would turn her back to me, and I would lie staring at the ceiling in the darkness, feeling tears roll silently down my temples. I would speak to God in whispers, pouring out my pain and asking for strength for the day ahead, and always, I felt that small but real peace knowing that He saw, that He understood, and that there was a purpose to it all. Months went by like this, months of constant rejection, mockery at work, coldness at home, and feeling like a stranger in my own life, but they were also months of profound spiritual growth. My faith grew stronger, not in spite of the suffering, but through it. 4334. I learned to pray with an intensity I had never known before. The words of the Bible ceased to be mere text and became real nourishment for my hungry soul. My fellow church members became my spiritual family. They understood what I was going through because many of them had experienced the same thing. I found comfort in their hugs, their prayers, and their company, yet even that was bittersweet, for every time I found refuge in the church, I felt I was drifting further away from my biological family. One day, after a particularly powerful service where I had tangibly felt God's presence, I returned home with a heart overflowing. I wanted to share the joy with my family. I walked in to find everyone sitting in the living room, watching television. I enthusiastically told them what I had experienced, how God had touched my heart and how I had wept with gratitude. Carlos Eduardo turned up the volume on the TV. Gloria Elena got up and walked into the kitchen without a word. Dulce Maria looked at me with pity, as if I were a child who didn't understand that no one wanted to play with him. I stood there in the middle of the living room, my Bible tucked under my arm and my heart shattered into pieces. That night, sitting on the edge of my bed, I had a long conversation with God. I told Him everything I was feeling, without filters, without trying to sound spiritual. I told Him it hurt too much, that it was incredibly difficult, and that I didn't know how much more I could bear. I asked Him if it was truly worth losing my family to follow Him, and in the silence of that night, as tears streamed down uncontrollably, I heard a voice within me that was not my own. It wasn't an audible sound, yet it was more real than any noise. It told me that he, too, had been rejected by his own people, that he, too, had known the loneliness of choosing to obey the Father above all else. It reminded me that the narrow path has always been a lonely one, but that we are never truly alone. That certainty sustained me. It didn't make the pain disappear, but it gave me the strength to keep walking despite it. Months turned into years, years spent living torn between two worlds. At work, I remained a target for mockery, though over time some colleagues got used to the situation, and the teasing became less intense. At home, things settled into a state of constant coldness. There were no more open arguments, just a polite distance, a superficial respect that masked our true disconnection. I kept praying for them every night. I kept asking God to touch their hearts and show them the truth I had found, but the years went by, and nothing changed. Carlos Eduardo got married and barely invited me to the wedding. When I gave my blessing during the ceremony, I did so with tears in my eyes, not tears of joy, but of sadness over the distance between us. Dulce Maria left to study in another city and hardly ever called me. When she did, our conversations were brief, superficial, and filled with awkward silences. Gloria Elena and I lived like roommates, not husband and wife. We shared a roof and a routine, but not our hearts. I carried all of that while building houses for others, mixing cement under the scorching sun, laying bricks that would form happy homes for families who actually understood one another. The irony wasn't lost on me. I was building spaces filled with love for other people while my own home was falling apart. Then came the hottest summer I had experienced in years, the kind of summer where asphalt melts, the air seems to boil, and even breathing feels like an effort. We were working on a major project, a 3-story building in the eastern part of Guadalajara. The owner was in a rush and pressured us to finish quickly. That meant longer shifts, fewer breaks, and greater demands placed on bodies that were already pushed to the limit. That morning, I woke up feeling strange. There was an unusual heaviness in my chest, a dull pressure that was hard to pin down. I thought it was accumulated fatigue, stress, or perhaps the heat, which was already stifling so early in the day. Gloria Elena was still asleep when I got up. I quietly packed my lunch, picked up my Bible, and read a psalm before leaving. The psalm spoke of trusting in God amidst tribulation, of finding refuge under His shadow. I didn't know then that those would be the last words I'd read in this life. I arrived at the construction site, and the heat was already brutal. The thermometer read over 35 degrees Celsius, and it was barely past 8 in the morning. We knew it would be a hellish day, but we had to meet the scheduled progress. We started working. I was on the second floor, hauling bags of cement, mixing, and applying the mortar. Sweat soaked my clothes within minutes. I drank water constantly, but it seemed to evaporate before it could hydrate my body. As the morning wore on, the heat became more oppressive. It was like being inside an oven. The air I breathed burned my lungs. I could feel my heart racing and my hands trembling slightly as I held the trowel. The tightness in my chest, which I'd felt earlier that morning, was intensifying. I tried to ignore it. I'd been doing this job for 32 years. I had endured summers just as harsh. I could handle this. I had to handle it. During the midday break, I couldn't eat. My stomach had completely shut down. I just drank water and sat in the shade, trying to regain my strength. My co-workers were talking and laughing, but their voices sounded distant, as if coming from another world. Raul Fernando asked if I was okay. I told him yes, it was just the heat. He shrugged and went back to eating. When we returned to work, the sun was at its highest and the most merciless point. The temperature had climbed past 40 degrees Celsius. Every movement required a titanic effort. I went up to the third floor, which was still roofless and completely exposed to the direct sun. I needed to carry up more bags of cement to finish a wall. I hoisted the first bag and felt my legs nearly buckle under the weight. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. The pressure in my chest had turned into pain, a sharp pain radiating down my left arm. I knew what that meant. I had spent years hearing stories of men dying of heart attacks on construction sites, but it couldn't be happening to me. No, not now. I still had so much to do. I still needed to see my family reconciled. I still needed to fulfill the purpose God had for me. I tried to make my way down from the third floor, but my legs wouldn't cooperate. I took 2 steps and felt the world begin to spin. The chest pain intensified until it became unbearable. It was no longer just pressure. It felt as if someone were squeezing my heart with an iron fist. I wanted to scream, to call for help, but no voice came out, only a stifled groan that was lost in the noise of the construction site. I fell to my knees. My hands were trembling uncontrollably, my vision blurred. The blinding sun above me mingled with dark spots encroaching on my sight. I heard distant shouts. Someone had realized something was wrong. I felt hands holding me, voices calling my name. Hector, Hector, hang in there, help is coming. But those voices were drifting further and further away, as if I were sinking into a deep well while they remained above, out of reach. The pain in my chest reached a point where it ceased to be pain and turned into something else, something I have no words to describe. It was as if my entire being was being compressed, squeezed, disintegrated, and then suddenly the pain disappeared completely. I felt an absolute lightness. I was no longer on my knees on the hot concrete. I no longer felt the weight of my 50 years, my ruined back, my worn-out knees. I no longer heard the voices of my companions. There was only silence, a deep, total silence, but not terrifying. It was a silence full of peace. I opened my eyes, or at least I think I did, because what I saw wasn't the third floor of the building. I was in a place I can't accurately describe because it was unlike anything I'd ever seen before. It wasn't dark, but it wasn't bright in the way we know light either. It was as if the light was coming from everywhere and nowhere at the same time. There was no ground beneath my feet, but I wasn't falling. There was no ceiling above me, but I didn't feel exposed. It was a space that wasn't space. A moment that wasn't time, and then I saw it. At first, he was just a figure in the distance, but as he drew nearer, or perhaps it was I who drew nearer, I began to discern features. He was a man, but not an ordinary man. There was something about him that radiated authority and tenderness simultaneously, power and compassion, blended in a way that defied all logic. His eyes, I will never forget his eyes. They were as deep as oceans, as ancient as time itself, yet brimming with life. When those eyes met mine, I felt as if every layer of my being was laid bare. There was nothing to hide, nothing to pretend. He saw me completely, every thought, every pain, every doubt, every tear I had silently shed, and instead of feeling ashamed, I felt relief. Finally, someone truly saw me. Finally, someone understood. I fell to my knees, not out of obligation, but because my legs simply gave way before the magnitude of his presence, and I wept. I wept as I had never wept before in my life. All the years of pent-up pain, of silent rejection, of profound loneliness, came out in sobs that shook my entire being. I couldn't speak, I just wept, and he knelt before me. Jesus, the Son of God, the King of Kings, knelt down to my level. He placed his hand on my shoulder, and that simple touch filled me with a warmth that wasn't physical, but spiritual. It was pure love, unconditional, without expectations, without limits. When I could finally speak, the words came out broken, filled with pain. Lord, it hurt so much. I lost everything. My family rejected me. My friends mocked me. I was left alone. I spent years feeling like a stranger in my own life. It was worth it. Tell me it was worth it, because I don't know if I can bear any more. He looked at me with those eyes full of infinite compassion and spoke. His voice wasn't loud, but it resonated deep within my soul. Hector, my son, I saw every tear you shed in the darkness of your room. I collected each one. I saw every moment you felt alone in the crowd. I was with you through every taunt, every rejection, every night you wondered if you could go on. You were never alone, never. My tears kept falling, but now they were different. They were tears of relief, of understanding, of healing. But, Lord, I carried on. I lost my family. My children despised me. My wife walked away. Those I considered brothers at work made me a laughingstock. I gave everything and was left with nothing. He smiled, and that smile held a wisdom that pierced eternities. Hector, you didn't lose anything that was eternal. What you let go of was temporary, fragile, destined to fade away. But what you gained, what you built in the spiritual realm, that remains forever. Every moment of obedience, every decision to follow me despite the cost, every tear shed out of love for me, all of that created treasures that will never rust or be lost. But it hurt so much, I whispered. The cross always hurts, he replied. I never promised comfort, I promised transformation, and true transformation doesn't happen in ease. It happens in the fire. You went through the fire, Hector. You went through the heat that burns away everything superficial, everything false, everything non-essential, and what remained after the fire is pure gold. Your faith was tested and found it genuine. He stood up and helped me to my feet. We were now face to face. Look at me, Hector, he said. Look at my hands. He extended his hands, and I saw the marks. The nail scars were neither ugly nor repulsive. They were beautiful in their significance. They were proof of the price he himself had paid. I, too, was rejected by my own, he continued. My own family thought I had lost my mind. My brothers didn't believe in me until after the resurrection. The religious leaders who should have recognized me condemned me. The crowd that once cheered for me shouted, "Crucify him." Just a few days later, I understand rejection, Hector. I understand loneliness. I understand the pain of being misunderstood by those you love. I felt something break inside me, but it was a healing break. It was as if an abscess filled with infected pain finally drained, allowing healing to begin. But, Lord, I asked with a broken voice, why does it have to be this way? Why does following you cost so much? Why is the path so narrow and so lonely? Because many want my crown, but few want my cross, he answered firmly, yet without harshness. Many want the blessings but flee from the process. Many want the glory but reject the suffering. Not you, Hector. You chose obedience when it cost you everything. You chose to trust when you had no guarantees. You chose to follow when everyone told you that you were crazy, and that choice holds an eternal value that even you cannot fully comprehend right now. Tears kept flowing, but now something else was mixed in with them, hope, a deep hope that began to fill the empty spaces in my heart. Hector, Jesus continued, the cross is not punishment, the cross is transformation. It is the instrument where the ego dies so that true life may be born. It is the place where everything you are not, in reality, is crucified so that the person you were created to be from the beginning may emerge. You died to self day after day. You died to the need for approval. You died to the desire to fit in. You died to the comfort of conformity. And in each of those small deaths, you were born more into my image. We walked together through that indefinable place. I do not know if we were actually moving or if the space was moving around us. But as we walked, he showed me things, he showed me moments of my life that I had forgotten or had not valued at the time. At the right moment, he showed me that night when I prayed alone in my room after Carlos Eduardo humiliated me in front of his friends. I saw the scene from the outside, as if I were an observer. I saw myself weeping into my pillow, but now I could see something else. I could see the presence of Jesus in that room, standing beside my bed with his hand on my back as I sobbed. He was there. He had always been there. He showed me the day at the construction site when Raul Fernando mocked me for praying. I saw the scene again, but this time I saw something I hadn't noticed before. I saw angels surrounding me, protecting me, and upholding me while the enemy tried to destroy my faith through humiliation. And I saw Jesus amidst the crowd of workers, invisible to them but fully present, looking at me with pride. He showed me countless moments like that, moments where I had thought I was alone, but he had been present, moments when I felt no one understood me, yet all of heaven was watching and celebrating my faithfulness. Then Jesus took me to a different place, a vast hall filled with indescribable treasures. There were chests of gold, jewels glowing with their own light, and crowns adorned with precious stones. He said to me, all this is yours. Every tear you shed became a pearl. Every moment of rejection you endured for my name was transformed into refined gold. Every lonely night spent in prayer instead of complaint created these crowns. You lost nothing, Hector. You invested in the only bank that never fails, the bank of the eternal kingdom. I was speechless. The magnitude of what I saw was overwhelming. All the pain, all the suffering, all the rejection suddenly made sense. It wasn't punishment, it was investment, it was sowing, and now I was seeing the harvest. But then Jesus changed his tone. He became more serious, more urgent. Hector, it is not yet your time. I froze. I didn't understand. I thought I had finally reached eternal rest. I thought the pain was over. Lord, no, please, I can't go back. I can't bear anymore. Here I found peace. Here I found validation. Here, everything makes sense. Don't make me return to that place where no one understands, where everyone rejects me. He placed both hands on my shoulders and looked me straight in the eye with an intensity that was a blend of love and authority. Hector, the world you left behind is asleep. They are anesthetized by a gospel that doesn't transform because it doesn't confront. They have forgotten the price. They have forgotten the cross. They are following a Jesus created in their own image, a comfortable Jesus, a Jesus who blesses without demanding, a Jesus who forgives without calling for repentance. But that is not me. I can't, Lord, I repeated, in desperation. I have no strength, I have no words, I am just a bricklayer. No one will listen to me. Yes, they will listen to you, he replied firmly, because you will not speak with human wisdom, but with heavenly authority. You will return with an anointing that burns away all disbelief. You will return as a witness that the price is worth it. You will return to tell them that the door remains narrow, that the path remains straight, but that at the end of that path lies the glory that no eye has seen nor ear has heard. But my family, I whispered, they never believed me. If I go back, it will be the same. Hector said with tenderness yet firmness, you are not returning to change your family. You are returning to be faithful to your calling. I am the one who changes hearts. You simply have to obey, plant the seed, I will bring the growth, and I promise you this, Hector, your faithfulness will not be wasted, your children will see, your wife will understand, perhaps not today, perhaps not tomorrow, but the day will come when they recognize that what they took for madness was actually the greatest sanity, that what they considered fanaticism was simply radical love. Tears fell again. Lord, I am afraid of loneliness, afraid of rejection, afraid of not being enough. I will be with you, he whispered, and if I am with you, what can stand against you? Do not fear the rejection of man, Hector, fear only straying from my will. The temporary rejection of men cannot compare to the eternal approval of the Father. Then he embraced me. Jesus embraced me, and in that embrace, I felt all the Father's love, all the Spirit's power, and all heaven's grace pouring over me. It was as if years of pain melted away in seconds, as if every wound found its balm, as if every unanswered question finally made sense. When you feel alone, he whispered in my ear, remember this moment. Remember that I am with you, remember that every step you take in obedience makes hell tremble and heaven celebrate, remember that present suffering cannot compare to the glory to come, remember that I have overcome the world, and you will overcome in my name. Then he let go and stepped back, his face shone with a light I cannot describe. Go, Hector, return, be my voice in their silence, be my light in the darkness surrounding them, tell them the door is still open but not for long. Tell them the time to decide is now, tell them I love them. But my love demands a response. I cannot force anyone to love me, but I invite everyone to truly know me. Suddenly, I felt a violent yank. It was as if someone were tearing me away from that place of peace and hurling me back through a dark tunnel. I tried to resist, I tried to stay, but the force was irresistible. The tunnel grew narrower, darker, more suffocating, and then, abruptly, the pain returned. All the pain that had vanished came back suddenly, and multiplied. It was as if every nerve in my body were on fire. I felt a brutal electric shock tear through my chest once, twice, 3 times. I heard voices shouting, clear. Again. Charge to 300. The shock hit again, my body arched involuntarily, and then with a violence that stole my breath my lungs filled with air. It was the most painful breath I had ever taken. It burned, it was raw, it felt like inhaling fire. I opened my eyes, and everything was blinding light, artificial lights, ambulance lights, the sun still blazing in the sky. Blurred faces leaned over me, paramedics with expressions of shock. We got him back, one shouted, he has a pulse, he's back. I tried to speak, but only a groan escaped. My body wasn't responding well. Everything hurt, yet I was alive. Incredibly, impossibly I was alive. Sir, one of the paramedics murmured, you were dead for nearly 7 minutes. This is a miracle. You shouldn't be alive, but I was, and I knew why. I knew I had returned for a purpose. It wasn't my time to rest, it was my time to bear witness. The following days in the hospital were a mix of physical pain and spiritual clarity. My body was slowly recovering from the massive heart attack I had suffered. The doctors couldn't fully explain my recovery. One of them, a young doctor named Adrian Jose, told me frankly that, according to the tests, my heart had been too badly damaged. I should have been left with severe lasting effects or simply not survived at all. Yet here I was, improving day by day in a way that defied their prognoses. My family came to visit. Gloria Elena arrived first, her eyes red from weeping. She sat by my bed and took my hand. I thought I was losing you, she whispered. I thought you were leaving and that the last words between us had been cold. Forgive me, Hector, forgive me for not understanding. I looked at her and saw something different in her eyes. I saw fear, yes, but also something else. Viuna pure intrabeata, notions que peda perdon, lodige convostable. I understand it was hard, but I need you to know something. I need to tell you what I saw. Carlos Eduardo arrived later that day. He walked into the room with an expression I hadn't seen in years: vulnerability. At first, he sat down without saying a word, just looking at me hooked up to monitors and divs. Dad, he finally spoke. The doctors said you were dead, that your heart stopped for almost 7